if I look at the talks that have happened today, I feel like I sort of got the opportunity to sneak into a grad class. And it's been phenomenal. I'm going to bring it down a couple of notches. The point of this talk is for those of you who are like, man, I am so excited to have any customers at all. How do I move from the mom and pop store, the whatever I can nail, into some of these bigger projects that I see other people having? I think it's awesome that 10Up has 120 people. I have 1, 2, maybe 5. And so what I'm going to talk about is some of the transition and experiences we had. Most of my talks are really story-based, but we have like 30 minutes, which means I have time for like one story. So I'm going to ratchet it way back into maybe just some big point takeaways. And the next time you meet me in person, if you're there, you can buy me a cider or a bourbon, and I will fill in the stories. So this is me. I've had the blessing and opportunity to do some cool stuff over the years with some pretty big brands. We have a team. I think we're in the mid-high 40s at this point. We are entirely dispersed. We're mostly in North America. We work with a lot of big brands. It's been really fun. Everything in higher ed to government to tech, and there's a lot. I picked some arbitrary ones. We do have some well-adopted WordPress plugins. We'll probably hit 2 million next month, and a bunch of others. So what I'm going to hit, really, like a lot of WordCamps that I go to, a lot of smaller agency or freelancers pull me aside and they're like, hey, so how do I get to the next level? Like, I want to level up. What are the steps? What are the things I need to do? And we typically end up having 2 conversations. The first is, I remember we first landed MIT, well, we did land MIT, but that wasn't it. We first landed MTV. And designers on our team came to us and they're like, why would MTV work with us? I mean, this is MTV, like they are a design franchise. These people, wow. And it was a really interesting conversation to come out of that. And I was like, well, actually, there's a lot of reasons. In this case in particular, and I'll hit some of them, it was because we managed to integrate ourselves in a partnership. And so we came bundled. And it was convenient, and it worked out really well. And so there's a lot of reasons, and I'll go through them. First of all, honestly, sometimes it's timeline. For whatever kind of reason, they need to accelerate the pacing of what they need to achieve, and they can't do that with who they have internally. So they look outside of the organization to work with somebody. So sometimes that is one of the reasons that we have. It's a really common reason we get leads. People come out and they're like, so our executive team just gave us a 3-month goal. And that 3-month goal is going to require a handful of miracles. Are you a miracle provider? And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is keep praying. I can't pull that off. And so there's an important series of conversations in terms of what you can achieve. Sometimes it's partnerships. Actually, MTV was a great example, but there's a number of companies, and sometimes we're the ones who go out there and solve business and people problems. And sometimes these require technical solutions after the thinking is done. And if you can build relationships with some of the people out there who are pitching thought leadership solutions and be kind of a tactical team that goes with them, we've made it into the door with a lot of large organizations where they have the talent, but the person who came with the solution to the problem brought the whole package. And so they bought the whole package. Sometimes you need perspective. We worked with eBay for a long while, and I remember we had this opportunity to work on their core mobile product. And it wasn't because they didn't have talent, they had a million talent. It's just that particular team's like, we have been staring at this problem so long, we don't even see it anymore. And we just need somebody to give us a fresh set of eyes. And we trust you, we know you, come on over to this side of the house. And it was an opportunity to work on, I mean, just crazy when you realize that it's a billion, I call it the $1 billion button. And that's not the type of thing that's normally outsourced ever. And yet, because they just need another set of eyes, it gave us an opportunity to become part of that discussion. This is the obvious one in a way. This is the one most people imagine. They're like, oh yeah. I just had a call with a department at Stanford 2 days ago, and they said very simply, well, we have some really talented Java engineers who took a hand at WordPress. Now we need some WordPress people to undo everything they did. And okay, yes, we have particular expertise where we can unwind some of these more particular challenges that they're facing. So sometimes they'll go out and look, and that's being understood as being an expert in a particular skill set. This is one most people don't realize, but so a lot of large organizations have what I consider a bottom floor or ceiling as to what you can spend without having to get a ton of permission. Seems to be somewhere around $25,000. At most large brands, if you can sneak in under the 25 mark, you don't have to go through crazy paperwork and bureaucracy. And so a lot of times they'll go in and they'll be like, well, I requisitioned a designer to solve this problem and was informed that I need to wait 6 weeks until the design team has space for my problem. They're like, if you can solve this for $24.99, you have it today. And so understanding the complexities of bureaucracy and how to work with them to be successful plays a really big role. And then you go like, great, how many phases can we do this in? There's also accountability. Like I had a really interesting conversation with a product manager at SAP a few years ago, and I asked him, I was like, Fred, you are asking me to do some really basic stuff. We're kind of expensive for what you're asking for. This makes no economic sense to me. Can you explain why you're trying to get my team to do this stuff? And his answer was simply this: your team has such a history of delivering on scope, on budget, on time, with thought leadership involved, that the energy I have in supervising this task exceeds the value of the cost I have in paying for it. So he's like, I can trust your team to deliver, and therefore that is worth paying for it in that fashion. And so building those kind of relationships, I think Nancy's concept of I don't sell a product, I sell a relationship rings so deeply true when you consider a lot of these concepts, especially when it comes around delivery. I'm burning through this. So when it comes time to think about it, usually the first question is like, where do you find these customers? Like, that's nice, Shane. I'll do all that stuff. Now I'm armed. Kind of, honestly, if you put enough time into thinking through your network and you drive through relationships, most of the time I find people can find at least one really, or if not a few really good leads just out of the relationships they know if they're really thoughtful and careful. It's life. Like, I got a lead to Boeing through my father, and was it a great project? No, it was the weirdest project we have ever done as a company ever, but suddenly I had this logo of Boeing that I leveraged to the hilt, because now I had some credibility. I got another one through a guy I met in a coffee shop. It turned out to be the CTO of a company, and I complimented him on having the world's smallest laptop because I was like, it's cool. And we made friends, and through that kind of relationship, it comes like, so a lot of people see this wall of logos that a lot of companies in this room have, and I will tell you right now that wall of logos is totally meaningless. It means absolutely nothing. What really happens is there are project managers, VPs, product people, somebody who you built a relationship with, who went to bat, who sold you. And if that person leaves that company, you are back to complete zero. Like, and so figuring out how to sell to people, how to give those relationships, and those relationships are fascinating because depending on what the industry is. In tech, Vasquez mentioned a 3 to 5 year turnover agency. Well, tech in the valley, it's faster than that. If you make a really good friend, you can just follow them all over the valley. And so we've gone from having a customer at SAP who became a VP of a startup and then became a customer. We had another PM at SAP who we followed to another large data intel company, the Oracle. And so you you can sort of nurture these relationships and follow them. And at the same time, it's something really interesting. One of the things we often worry about is once we're within an organization, are you making other friends? Because you can't count on this one relationship to sustain a customer base with a large organization. Also, a lot of these large organizations, you see a brand Stanford. Stanford represents like 50 tiny companies under one giant brand. And so figuring out how to sort of make the natural referral step and build other relationships and other groups so that you can move naturally throughout organizations is really important. Probably the best thing ever is to stop thinking of it as one company. And you start getting a better idea on how to understand. As you're getting started, you're going to need some street cred. And you're not going to need the cred for the initial sale. You're going to need the credibility to provide that internal person what they need to go to bat. Because ultimately what's going to happen at any one point is they're going to have to get buy-off. And when they get buy-off, they're going to ask a whole bunch of questions like, why aren't you using internal resources? And is this the right team? And if you don't give them what they need in order to do that, you're going to have a really hard time. Getting in the door isn't actually always the toughest challenge. It's making it past the next rounds. And if you don't have credibility yourself, borrow it. I think some of my initial early projects, some of the best thing came out of that CTO guy I mentioned I met at a coffee shop. We became good enough friends that I started being like, hey, can I lean on you and add you as a reference into some of my early proposals and be like, this, I'm small fries, but this guy's got credibility and he's keeping an eye on this project and he's here to help me out, which he was. I leaned on him as a mentor. And so you can lean on credibility and mentorship. Sometimes you can lean on past credibility and mentorship. If you work for a larger agency and you can build a story of success that you can lean on in a way that's professional and well balanced. But these are really important. And to think about, if anything, just think about how you deal with the credibility. I got this out of a conference. I wish I remembered who to give credit to. It became a huge conversation in mentorship. And it's true in project management, it's true in marriage, it's true in sales. But a lot of times, when we work with customers, it's about framing the discussion. It's not like, what do you want? It's which do you want? Which would you like? Would you like this in 3 months, but we're going to sacrifice quality because that's what that timeline requires? Or would you rather we go to back and tell them that quality is what matters, but it's going to take 4 months? Which is more important for you guys as an organization? And when you start having these which discussions, and then the customer and the people are on board with the decision, you have that famous, speed, budget, whatever, pick 2 or 3. I tend to find it's not pick 2 or 3, it's have an intelligent conversation about what the necessary outcome needs to be, where everybody's aware of the trade-offs that are being made and participate in that decision. I guess technically that's true from the stack of the smallest customer to the large one, but I tend to find the larger the organization, the more important these conversations become. And the more important the conversations become about what does a win look like. When you work with a large organization, let's see, is it in there? Or, well, I'll keep it there. Don't assume a title means anything from an authority and decision maker perspective. We had, I think, one of the worst experiences we've ever had with a really large hedge fund. And we worked directly with the CEO. And we were like, holy cow, this is amazing. And we worked with him, and he was so happy with the outcome, and he brought it to his board, and they just destroyed it, and they destroyed him. And I was like, oh, you're not actually in charge of your own company if you can't decide on a website. But it was an informative and educational experience for me because I'd assumed if you're the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, of course you're the decision maker. Like, how higher could I get? Turns out you can get higher. So when you sit down with an organization to sort of figure out, hey, are you actually the decision maker? Do you really have the ability to pull that trigger? What would it take for this to be a win with your bosses? Like, how's that look like? Tell me how I make you look like a champion. And if you can go through this iterative process of what's a win like, and it always starts with, oh, a win is when I get everything I could ever dream of on budget, and you're like, oh, that's wonderful. Tell me again, what's a win? Oh, well, my board really likes blue. And you're like, okay, we're narrowing here down to something really practical. And you tend to, it's never the first answer. You ask it again and again and again, and then you bring it down into the team and you carry that as a mantra. Like, we just finished, it took a while of discovery working with the Conroe School District in Texas, where it's 60 schools. And so actually coming up with a win organizationally of how does everybody get, and getting to the point where, like, their answer was, if we could just increase the velocity of content creation within the grounds of what we're doing for the school, as opposed to people going off on Facebook, going off everywhere, that would be really successful. And I was like, that is huge, because that changes some of the architectural decisions around permissions and around all these other things that you asked for, that if that's our shining light, we need to change this project. And I would have liked to have known it before the sales process, but you know, we learn and we remember, and it's really hard to be that patient when you're getting started. And I'll tell you, you can't assume that enterprise is going to take long or take short. It takes what it takes. But I'm in the middle of what I hope is the end of a 2-year sales cycle on a project. I hope it's the end. It's been a long, careful, nurturing courtship of exploration and thought and conversation. And these happen. You know, on the other hand, sometimes somebody shows up because of the time limit, and it's like, so can you start tomorrow? And at that point, you've got the credibility. But if you're going through the relationship-driven sales approach, well, then you got to have time to build the relationships and build the trust and the credibility. And that takes time. And so you can't just be like, and tomorrow we're going to be an enterprise services company. And maybe you can, but you might need to buy your way into that if you don't have the relationships to drive it on your own. I think we're saying, I mean, Nancy said this so well. Just stop trying to sell them shit. You know, if you can actually sit down and be a partner to figure out fundamentally the problem they're trying to solve, that's how you move from the cheap projects to the good projects. This is true in any industry, in any place. One of my very first business mentors always said, your income is in direct proportion to the problems you solve. Said, I pay my heart surgeon more than my shoe salesperson. It is, I value the problem more. And so, as a company, as you start thinking about not just bigger brands, but because a lot of times people go, I want bigger companies. What they really mean is, I'd like to make more money, have bigger influence. It's all this confluence of things. What comes down to is, start thinking about how you're going to solve bigger problems as an organization, more meaningful problems, and pivot that dialogue into that. For us, it's a lot of it is be a partner. Like that's our angle. Like, we're going to be that partner that's going to work with you. We're going to be as strategic as we are on the execution side. And everybody's got their own flavor and their own experience that they bring in their own way that they approach this particular challenge. Early on for us, the biggest challenge actually we had as we got into the enterprise clients was just navigating the bureaucracy. It was horrific. It took 8 months to get paid by Boeing. eBay's worst ever was a 6-month delay. And it was, I literally just didn't know how to successfully navigate their bureaucracy, and nor did they. And that's not unusual. You know, Stanford was particularly challenging. Now I've gotten really good to the point where we just went through a project and their head of communications, like, I've never seen a contract go through so quickly. And I was like, I know, but I went to their legal team and said, hey, we've already had all these fights. Can we not have them again? Like, we're good. Like, can we just agree to the same terms we had last time? And they're like, sure. Thank you for coming to us. That way we didn't have to do this. And I've learned, honestly, how do you format an invoice? The number of people who send me personally a poorly formatted invoice, well, you know why we didn't get paid by eBay for 6 months? I didn't know how they needed an invoice formatted. Nobody told us. They didn't come and say, hey, Shane, your invoice doesn't have the PO number on it. I just didn't know. I was like, PO number, what's that? Okay, now I know. And so learning the types of bureaucracies that are required to navigate these successfully has a lot to do, and comes a really big sales pitch. You know, the number of companies where we get through, if there is a public RFP or even the conversation, where at some point they're going to be like, are you going to make it through this? Like, are you going to survive getting through our bureaucracy? Like, do you know how to do this? And a lot of times I start asking questions like, well, they're like, hey, so we're going to want to start next week. And I'm like, that's nice. How long is it going to take to get through your procurement process, pass legal? And they're like, oh, you've done this before. And I'm like, I've done this before. Yes, I know what it's going to take. And I will facilitate going quickly, but it's a really important part. When you think about building trust and showing competence, it's one of these really weird, obnoxious early places where you score points that don't mean anything, but actually mean a lot. 25 minutes, cool. All right, so I will open it up. I'm sure that the people in this room might have questions, but I'm sure the people online have more of them. And we can sort of wander through stories or.
So you had mentioned RFPs in the last couple of minutes here.
Yeah.
Do you like to respond to unsolicited RFPs?
Don't you all love RFPs? We've developed a philosophy around them. And the philosophy goes like this. If I don't personally know somebody who is in a decision-making position for that project, I won't touch it. So blind RFPs, never going to get involved, mostly because I don't know that they know what they want. People write a lot of stupid stuff in RFPs that's based on what they know at that moment. And I've found that the amount of energy writing a proposal to answer that RFP, at least 50% of the time, it's the wrong solution to the wrong thing that just needed a conversation. If I can get a conversation with somebody who convinces me that they're in a place to position, well, one, I get the opportunity to build a relationship. That relationship usually is enough to move us into a finalist. Usually, not always, but it's enough that, okay, if I see a strong relationship at that point, we can get into a conversation. If we could avoid them, we avoid them at all costs. Everybody wants a direct connection and a non-competitive experience. But if you were just getting started, like if you were like, I'm a 5-person agency and I'm going to hire somebody to just write RFP responses for a year, I would be really curious if that was even a profitable endeavor. My guess is no, but that's not our business model, so I don't know. Yeah, hit it.
I work mostly with small and mid-sized businesses and agencies. What's in it for me to go through all that headache to procure a bigger brand name?
Sure. That's a really great question. There is overhead in every customer. But what we've found over time is the overhead does not scale evenly. So when you're able to land a $300,000 project as opposed to a $25,000 or $50,000 project, the degree of people management, customer management doesn't go up proportionally. Two, this isn't always true, but I've found that there's a certain sweet spot where the kinds of problems get more interesting. Three, I get really tired of constant budget conversations. And when we had smaller customers, they were very, very price sensitive around everything. And so there was less freedom to have just an honest, thoughtful exploration around the problem, as much as there was always that very strong tension around price. It's not that the corporate customers don't have the tension around price. It's just there's more space to have those kind of thoughts around quality and create interesting solutions for interesting problems that have bigger reach. There's a small amount of ego that I'll admit it's kind of cool when my mom knows what I do. And she's like, I know that company. So. It's true. My mother is, in fact, our customer. In fact, I passed that off to Reed. She's a tough one. Other questions? Thank you.
I have a question, a sort of vague question, but I learned something from you through Reed, and this is the reason I wanted you to give this presentation, and it's really affected every interaction I've had with a client since Reed's taught me this lesson, and it's your idea of what can I do to make this a win for you?
Yeah.
Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit? I haven't heard it from you, only from Reed.
Oh, sure. It actually came from Peter. And it did. We're having some interesting customer challenges, and it was a real early growing period for us. And Peter is probably the best conflict resolution person I've ever worked with. And he comes in with a very simple strategy. I'm so sorry I failed you. How could we be better? And in that process of listening, as we gone through those, he started to notice, wow, we all have a completely different understanding of what this project is. You have one, the team has another, I've got a completely different one. And so we found for us, just as a company, the more time we could spend just making sure everybody was on the same page, the less time we spent rewriting code, the less time we spent apologizing for getting it wrong. And that's been necessary as we scaled. It also, I think, both Vasquez and Nancy mentioned this. If you want people to succeed and provide them autonomy, you need to point out where they're walking to. You can give them walkers and tools, but at the end of the day, if they don't know where they're going, they're just going to go in circles, and that's really expensive and not great as a business owner when you walk in and notice everybody's going in random circles. So organizationally, whether that's at the project level or if we can define, what is a win for a company? That's culture. I mean, that's that whole conversation is what is culture like? Where are we headed? What are we trying to accomplish? But projects have their own culture and their own missions and their own definitions. And if you can get everybody on the same page, sometimes what gets really interesting is when you need to remind the customer. So we worked with Bon Appetit for quite a while, and I remember Peter and I had the opportunity to sit with their senior leadership team at a thank you dinner after a successful launch. And one of their VPs got up and he said, to the first company, and I'm not saying we're a no company, but to the first company who ever said no more than they said yes, and actually created something that solved the problem. And so if you can identify what that mission actually is, and then consistently remind the customer at every decision, so you can guide them using, which is only useful if people know what the basis is. Well, what do you want to do with, which way should we approach permissions? This way or this way? Remember, the goal is velocity of content creation. Okay, now that we frame that, let's have a thoughtful which. Otherwise, the which ends up being about budget, emotion, ego, all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the user or the project itself. I don't know if that answers it at all. Anything else about transitioning larger customers? Anything from the stream? Oh, yeah, hit it.
Is that on? Yeah. Just as a follow-up to that win question, when would you recommend asking that?
Oh, it's the first it's usually the third question on a sales call. The first question is, hey, what's your budget? Which I usually ask at least 10 times in a row. And it always starts with, oh, we're not going to tell you that. And I'm like, well, that's nice. Hey, what's your budget? And they're like, oh, I can't tell you. Well, here, I'm going to start throwing out numbers. And let's just see when you gasp, 50, 100, 200, 300. Okay, great. So your budget is somewhere between 100 and 250. Great, thank you. That was very helpful. Now let's have a thoughtful conversation around. So budget. The second is timeline. Always like, when do you need this by? Because that could just, at that point we're out. Like if we're booked for 2 months. Doesn't matter. I'm not 10 up. I'm not going to be like, no problem. We're going to add 12 people to the engineering team in the next 2 weeks, and we got your project. Like that's just not how we work. So we have a different approach. And then the third one is trying to get into identifying what that win is. Pretty much the only thing that doesn't result in a conversation is if it doesn't fit our minimum criteria up front. So as a company, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out, is there anything we won't do? In our case, we've decided that we have a wide diversity of religious beliefs, and it's just too complicated to create projects in that space that don't somehow create problems. So we don't deal with that. Same with a lot of heavy politics. We've decided that we're not going to get involved in heavy political projects just based on the kind of, and you know, I turned down the lotto because I think it's evil, and there's a few others, but that's at the heart of it, the bulk. So yeah, Kiko.
Live stream question, and that's how do you handle ongoing support for your big clients? Do you nail this down as part of the contract? Most enterprises want an SLA, so how do you accommodate this when you're using freelancers?
That is an awesome question, because usually the fifth or sixth conversation on the sales call I have to have with them is, we don't offer SLA level support. If you need that, we will refer you to other people who do. That's just not how we work. Now, it's not actually because we have freelancers. It's because we limit the size of our team underneath our pipeline, and we cherry pick our favorite projects, and we're busy. And therefore, if you have a certain minimum amount of volume, you will capture our attention and we will be there and present and available for you. But if you haven't said anything to us for 4 months, and then you suddenly show up with an emergency that needs to be done in 2 days, you're not on my load document. I don't have capacity for you. And without capacity, that limits my ability to be instantly responsive. And as a company, we decided not to keep that kind of capacity on the books. It wasn't worth it. So as part of that, we need to come up with a strategy to deal with that problem for customers. Now, the nice thing about the type of enterprise customer is a lot of them have in-house team. So a big part of a lot of our proposals is training. Hey, we're going to work with your in-house team. We're going to make sure that come the end of whatever cycle is when you choose that this is truly done, you will have somebody in-house who's trained up. That's one possibility. The second is, hey, we have relationship with other organizations. Westwork has been on the receiving end of a heck a lot of, and we're done. Here is some wonderful people who have a great reputation for providing that level of service. We're going to work with that as a relationship. I don't think it's killed as many deals as it maybe should, because a lot of times, I also explain to people that doesn't mean we're going to come in, build it once, and walk off into the sunset. Our longest relationship was 11 years. We just have a budget minimum, and as long as on a regular basis you have enough interesting things that you want to do that fits under our budget minimum, we are happy to keep working with you in whatever context makes the most sense for everybody. But if you ever hit the point where you just need less than that, we're no longer the best fit, and then we'll set you up with somebody who is. But that was a good question, live stream person.
So I have a question for you, which I know you mentioned that you don't generally bid on an RFP unless you have a relationship with the decision maker on the other end. I assume at some point there are some RFPs you guys don't win despite that relationship. Sure. What is your process of kind of ascertaining not necessarily where you went wrong, but what you might do differently next time?
We don't have one. Honestly, and we don't lose that many because we're so careful in the ones we engage with. But at the same time, look, we lost one with Harvard, which was weird because Harvard was already a customer, and we were like, what the heck? And there was a bit of a like, can somebody go figure out what the heck happened? And so there is some of that where we go back and we research and we look into it, and sometimes it's, you know, a lot of times the biggest challenge with RFPs is you got to find out if they're even legit. Sometimes they're validating a pre-existing preference, but they have to go through the motions because of internal bureaucracies. There's always reasons of which maybe half the time it's actually you, which is where the filtering process, I think, is one of the most important processes you can do in sales. It's qualifying. If you can qualify well, then it's not as big a process. That said, we can do better learning from the ones we don't get.